Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something delightfully dull, the sleepless life of a medieval Italian baker. Picture this, you're in a cramped stone bakery somewhere in Bologna around the year 1327. It's dark, not because it's late, but because it's always dark when you start. The air is thick with soot, flour, and the low groan of waking city streets. Your back aches, your eyelids protest, and you've already got dough under your fingernails. The fire hasn't even been lit yet, and you're already sweating. But don't worry, your job is simple. You just have to memorize and obey 47 rules. Keep the guild happy, dodge fines, feed the rich, serve the poor, pay your tithes, and make sure not a single loaf is underweight, or burnt, or round when it's supposed to be flat. Easy, right? You probably won't survive this dot, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time? Is it right now in your corner of the world? Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to cold stone and the vague hum of footsteps passing outside the shuttered window. The city is waking, or rather, it hasn't slept. Like you, you're up because the bread won't make itself, and because if you're late to the communal oven queue again, old Lorenzo will accidentally throw ash in your flour sack. He says it's for texture. You pull on a scratchy linen tunic, grab your bundle of kindling, and step out into a street that smells like sewage, garlic, and just a whisper of last night's wine. Bologna isn't the cleanest city, but it's yours. And today, like every day, it wants bread. Your bakery is carved into the ground floor of your home, a two-story structure leaning ever so slightly to the left. It shares a wall with the butcher's shop, and on warm days your dough rises faster from the meat heat. Perks of medieval synergy dot inside. Your assistant has already swept the hearth and left a tiny chalk sketch of a loaf on the counter. That's her signal that the yeast starter didn't explode again overnight. A small win. Now comes the first ritual, the oven. The furnace is a squat dome of brick and soot, blackened from decades of abuse. You feed it gently, with dry wood and whispered prayers. Fire is temperamental. Some bakers say it's a spirit. Others say it's just damp wood. You say whatever keeps the loaves from burning. While the fire grows, you knead. Your hands are rhythmic, practiced. Flour, water, yeast, and salt. That's the base. But depending on what you're baking and who it's for, you might be adding honey, lard, anise, or even crushed almonds. Not too many. Those are expensive. Save the good stuff for the merchant's wife. She tipped you a boiled egg last week. Luxury dot, the dough sticks a little. You scrape with your wooden spatula and mutter under your breath. Nothing is measured, of course. You go by eye, by weight, by feel. And if the batch is off, the punishment isn't just bad bread. It's fines. Or worse guild gossip.c. In medieval Italy, bakers aren't just flowery peasants. You're part of a guild, a brotherhood of crust and consequence. The art dei forni. They set the standards. They inspect the shops. They whisper behind flowery palms at the baths. If you forget to scrub your kneading table with lemon peel, someone will find out dot as the fire roars and your first batch begins. To rise, you step outside for a moment, just to catch a breath that doesn't smell like yeast. The sky is soft gray, the color of parchment soaked in tea. Somewhere a bell rings 5 tolls. Almost time for the daily oven rotation. Yes, the communal oven. You have a private one, technically, but it's too small to handle the volume your orders require. So like most bakers, you rotate with others at the city's main baking furnace, a giant, smoky room owned by the guild and lorded over by a man named Pietro, who swears he once baked for the Pope. He probably just means he once sold bread to someone who knew a priest. Today your slot is 6th. That gives you just enough time to finish prep, wrap the dough in linen, load it into baskets, and walk the half-mile through twisting streets without tripping on cobblestones or beggars or goats. You manage it, mostly. The communal oven smells like ambition and defeat. It's loud, everyone arguing over whose loaf goes where, who singed what, and which apprentice dropped a tray of focaccia last week and tried to hide it. It was Paolo. You all saw it. Pietro assigns you the top left corner. It's hot, which is good, but it's sloped slightly, so your loaves might come out oddly oval. You accept it with a bow, pretending to be honored. He smirks. Back at your stall, you sip watered wine and watch steam curl out of the oven's mouth like dragon breath. It's oddly calming, this moment. The bread is out of your hands, now literally, and all you can do is wait. One older woman mutters about a dream she had of bread that wept butter and sang in Latin. You nod, pretending to understand. Sleep deprivation does odd things in this business. So do bad mushrooms. Finally, the loaves emerge, golden, cracked just right. You test one gently with your fingertip. The crust sings. You grin, then you weigh it, and frown. It's 10 grams, under just 10. A fragment, a breath, and yet according to law number 7, all loaves sold to the public must weigh no less than 1 libra e mezzo. Upon final cooling, you're in violation. Again, you sigh. Time to get creative with the slicing. Maybe offer this one to the cathedral for the alms basket. Holy loopholes are still loopholes, and the day has only just begun. By mid-morning, the city begins to hum properly. Market stalls swing open like yawning mouths, and the sound of coin hitting wood echoes down narrow alleys. The air is warming now, just enough to coax a sheen of sweat onto your brow. You can feel it mixing with flour dust on your skin, turning into a kind of chalky paste you'll be too tired to wash off later. You shift the baskets closer to the front of the stall. First customers usually arrive just before the church bell rings. Terse, you arrange the loaves in neat rows, flat ones, braided ones, the darker rye that's still slightly taboo here. More on that later. Each shape has meaning. Each weight matters. You mutter their names like a monk reciting scripture. Panino, Pagnota, Ciambella, Falone. The man who hurries up to your stall is not here for poetry. He's here for lunch. 3 loaves. He gruts, eyes already scanning for flaws. You recognize him a tax clerk. He has soft hands and a suspiciously clean robe. For someone who's been working since sunrise. You offer the pagnant, medium-sized rounds. Dense but respectable. 1 libra and 6 once each, you say, pointing to the city's official bronze weight on the counter. He sniffs one, weighs it himself, and pays with the resigned sigh of someone who hates bread but fears hunger. More, you don't envy him. But he can't envy you, because you are a medieval baker in Italy, and you do not merely make bread. You navigate a legal labyrinth baked into every crust. The 47 bread laws weren't carved in marble. They changed often, adjusted to suit the season, the grain supply, or the mood of the podesta, mayor. But the general structure stayed the same. Fixed weights, restricted ingredients, strict price controls, public inspections, and collective punishment if anyone tried to cheat the system. Rule 18, for instance, prohibits the use of foreign flour unless explicitly declared on signage, in both Latin and the local dialect. Historians still argue whether this rule was truly about purity or simply a form of protectionism meant to favor local mills. Either way, it made your job harder. And then there's Rule 32. All bread shall bear the mark of its maker. Literally, you have to stamp or score your loaves with a unique identifying mark. Yours is a half-moon shape pressed in with the back of a spoon. Some bakers use initials. Others use symbols passed down from their master's master. It's like a medieval QR code, except it mostly just tells the bread police where to direct their complaints. Speaking of complaints, your guild is watching, always, and not just to enforce the laws, but to keep an eye on each other. Competition is fierce, and snitches do not get stitches. They get rewarded with better oven slots and whispered favor. Last month, a baker named Tommaso got caught selling bread on a Sunday without the proper fast day certification. You're not saying you told anyone, but you might have been loudly muttering about it within earshot of the tax clerk's niece. It's all part of the game. Flowery intrigue. Yeasty espionage. Still, not all rivalries are petty. Some of them are practical. You and Beatrice, who runs the bakery 2 streets down, share suppliers and tips. She has better connections with the wheat merchants. You know, a guy who finds salt at a discount. You make it work, because while the laws are strict, the reality of feeding the city is messier. Remember Rule 9? Bread sold for the poor must be made with whole meal and priced at no more than 2 denarii per libra. That sounds noble until you're the one trying to pay taxes, keep apprentices fed, and buy new oven tiles after the last one's cracked in the frost. So you make poor bread. But you also hedge your losses with sweet rolls and ceremonial loaves. For feast days. And if the priest's nephew wants a little extra anise in his next delivery, well, the law doesn't say you can't slip a few seeds into the dough. Just don't forget to weigh it. You glance at your apprentice. She's 17, maybe 18, and already knows more about moisture ratios than most monks. Right now, she's counting change for a woman who wants 2 loaves, sliced lengthwise to soak in broth for her husband's aching teeth. You watch her handle the scale careful, precise, respectful. She might make it, if the guild lets her, technically. She can't become a full member without her own oven. And she can't have her own oven unless she marries into a family that owns one, or inherits it from a father, uncle, or dead husband. Progress in baking, like so much else, is passed on in crusty patriarchy. Still, she works with purpose, and you admire that. You didn't always. Once you thought this was just a job. Then you learned the rules. Some of them make sense. Like Rule 3, bread shall not be made with spring water that smells of sulfur or iron. That's just good. Hygiene. Others are creative. Rule 21 prohibits bread from being sold in pairs because it confuses the market. Historians still argue whether this was economic regulation or superstition, but either way, it led to the bizarre workaround of tying loaves together with twine and calling them blessed bundles. And Rule 44? Ah, yes, the notorious no. Bread may resemble the Eucharist in shape or color, save by ecclesiastical decree. Apparently, one overzealous baker in Florence once made a round white loaf with a stamped sunburst and was accused of blasphemy. You prefer to stay safely within the boundaries of bland geometry. The sun climbs higher. More customers come. A merchant's wife buys 3 braided loaves for her midday guests. A group of laborers pool coins for a sack of crusty flats. You hear a child laugh, see a beggar sneak a roll off an unattended tray. You pretend not to notice and feel your feet ache in rhythm with the cobblestones beneath them. By noon, your stall is half empty. That's good. It means you're selling. It also means you'll be baking again by evening. The cycle doesn't stop. Dough waits for no one. And just as you're sweeping up crumbs, a city official strolls by, hands clasped behind his back, eyes darting to your baskets, your scales, your stamped crusts. You nod politely. He doesn't stop. Not today, but he will. Sooner or later, because here even the bread gets judged. The afternoon sun creeps across your bakery wall like melting butter, slow, inevitable, and just slightly too warm. You've scraped the last crumbs into the chicken's feed bowl, rinsed your flour-splotched arms in a cracked ceramic basin, and now it's time to sit. But you don't sit because you have rule number 12 looming over your shoulder like a disappointed father. All bread sold must conform to designated size, weight, and shape specifications as determined by the municipal grain office. This is the law that really ruins your naps. You walk back into the storage alcove, what generous people might call a pantry. Sacks of flour, each marked with an inked seal, line the back wall. Every sack has been inspected and weighed twice, once at delivery, again by the local Miseratore del Grano, the official grain measurer, who stopped by 2 days ago and sniffed dramatically before declaring your barley acceptable, but suspicious. That's the tone they always use. It keeps bakers like you alert. The thing is, these specifications aren't just bureaucratic flair. They matter, because if your loaf is even slightly misshapen, or off-weight, or resembles the forbidden ecclesiastical geometry, again, remember that sunburst incident from Florence? You might get reported, and reports mean fines. Or worse, forced. Public contrition. That brings us to the mild panic portion of today's production schedule. You exhale slowly and lift a round of dough from its proving bowl. It's supple, warm, and slightly sticky. You love this part. This is the part where bread still feels like magic, like alchemy, but then comes the weighing. You place the ball onto the bronze scale, carefully calibrating against your set of hammered weights. It's close, so close, but the humidity is playing tricks again, and the grain batch this week is absorbing less water. That means every loaf risks being too light after baking. Or worse, unevenly baked, you need in a few extra pinches of flour, gently but with urgency. Your apprentice glances at you, senses your rhythm shift, and readies the next piece for scaling. She's learning your body language. That's good. That'll matter later when the real stress begins. The real stress is Law 29. Law 29 says loaves found to be underweight shall be forfeit to the Piazza della Vergogna for public destruction. That's not a poetic exaggeration. That's a civic ritual. You've seen it. A stone platform in the town square, right beneath the municipal office balcony where underweight loaves are burned in front of a crowd. The bailiff reads the bakers. Name aloud, displays the offending bread, and casts it into the fire while shouting, "Pain falso, fake bread." That's what they call it, Dot. It's meant to shame, to warn, to entertain. Dot, once when you were still an apprentice, your master's name was shouted there. He stood silently beside the pile, as flames licked at a dozen misshapen pagnotte. Later, he claimed the flour had been sabotaged. Maybe it had. Historians still argue whether that specific case in Siena was an honest mistake or part of a broader conspiracy involving rival guilds. Either way, he never recovered. The shame stuck like stale crust, Dot. So yes, you weigh with purpose, Dot. You also measure dimensions, length, width, height, because the law doesn't stop at weight. Rule 20 describes acceptable ratios for different styles of bread, with instructions. So detailed they might as well be architectural blueprints. A filone, for instance, must be no longer than 1½ palmi, and may not curve beyond natural inclination. Whatever that means, you once argued with an inspector about whether your loaves had too much flourish. He responded by poking one with a stick and saying, "Bread should not look proud." You keep things plain now, not beautiful. Just legal. The funny thing is, the people don't seem to care. Customers rarely complain about size or shape. They care about taste, crust, crumb. But the guild, the podesta, they care about consistency, control, and quotas. Bread is political. Always has been. Take Rule 41. Bakers must adjust portion sizes during grain shortages as per the council's decree. Sounds fair, right? Except that you still have to charge the same price, even when the loaves are smaller. Because admitting a shortage would cause panic, and panic leads to riots, and riots lead to dead chickens and broken shutters, and nobody wants that again, Dot. So you smile, make smaller loaves, and pretend nothing's wrong. You remember one summer when the river flooded. The mills and the grain shipments from Romania were delayed. Prices spiked, but you were still expected to make bread of familiar form. You ended up cutting every loaf by a finger's width and hoped no one had a ruler handy. The worst part? The annual inspection festival, Dot. Yes, festival, Dot, once a year. The city holds a grand public weighing of bread, where guild leaders show off their most compliant bakers. It's meant to build trust, boost morale, and discourage underground ovens. But mostly, it's a popularity contest with scales. Last year, you were selected. You spent 2 days crafting the most regulation-perfect loaves of your life, each one identical, measured with string, smoothed with wet cloths, scored with geometric precision, and you won nothing, because the winning baker had brought cherry almond wafers for the council. Sweetened diplomacy. You, meanwhile, got a pat on the back and a reminder that your crusts were a touch aggressive. There's no winning, really, just not losing. Still, You keep going, because baking is what you do. You understand the dough's moods. You can smell underproofing. You can hear a hot spot in the oven just by the hiss it makes. These are talents that don't get written into law, but they matter more than any rule. You pull the next tray of loaves from the cooling shelf. Beautiful, plump, legal. Probably. You test one with a quick bounce. Too springy. It'll deflate a little before market. You mark it for the bishop's servant. He prefers the springy ones. Says they remind him of his youth. You're not sure how bread does that, but you're not here to judge nostalgia. Outside. The bell tolls sext. Midday. Time to deliver the second batch to the kitchen at the almshouse, where poor residents queue for coarse loaves made with old grain and kindness. Those loaves follow different rules, 8, 24, and 36, if you remember right. Lower weights allowed, coarser grind. No crust scoring, but they must still be marked. Even poverty must be tracked. As you wrap the loaves in cloth, you think again. Of those 47 laws, you've memorized them. Not just out of fear, but because they've become the rhythm of your hands, the timing of your sleep, the heat of your oven. You're not baking bread, you're performing a ritual. One with consequences, flour and occasionally fire. The moment you step outside with your delivery bundle, the sunlight slaps you in the face like a baker's flatboard. It's hot. The kind of hot that turns bread, crusts brittle, and makes people blame their tempers on the weather. Your feet carry you out of your alley, through the bustle, and toward the almshouse. Each step a quiet rehearsal of diplomacy. You've done this route 100 times. Past the ironworker's stall, always clanging. Past the fountain where the same dog naps. In the shade. Past that one windowsill with the basil pot that smells like hope. Your bread is tucked in a linen shroud like a sacred offering, and in a way, it is. You reach the wooden doors of the almshouse kitchen and knock twice, then once again, your agreed rhythm. A pale-haired boy answers. You don't know his name, but he always smiles and always counts the loaves out loud, like he doesn't trust your math. Fair enough. Today you brought 11 loaves, half barley, half wheat, all regulation. You know that because you double-checked. The rule here is Rule 8. Bread for charitable distribution must be weighed and inspected prior to delivery and bear the stamp of the municipal crescent. Your apprentice seared the stamp in with a hot iron rod this morning, hissing quietly, as the crescent marked the crust like a brand. This is the work people forget, the bread you don't sell, the crusts you donate, the warm, damp sacks you carry through heat and stink and judgment. The podesta doesn't count this when assessing your worth, but the beggars do, and the nuns, they remember. Sometimes they leave you herbs and return wild mint, a pinch of marjoram, a smile without words. You turn to go, but the kitchen nun stops you. She's barely 5 feet tall, but somehow towers over everyone. She leans in conspiratorially and whispers, "You didn't hear it from me, but tomorrow the grain assessors will visit the south quarter first. Start your mixing early." You thank her with a solemn nod and the extra heel of a honey roll. Bribery? No. Gratitude, dusted with sugar. As you head back, you think again about flour. Not just the feel of it, or the way it clings to everything, including your thoughts, but the trouble it causes, because not all flour is equal. And in medieval Italy, That was more than a culinary issue. It was political. Flour feuds were legendary, especially between millers and bakers. You buy flour from a local mill, sure, but how local is local? And how clean is clean? Rule 11 dictates that all flour must be free of husk, worm, ash, or adulteration. Sounds noble, almost poetic. But let's be real. A little husk happens. So does worm. You sift, you stir, you pray. There's also Rule 14, which forbids the substitution of chalk, white clay, or powdered bone in place of grain. Yes, powdered bone. Apparently, some desperate soul once thought ground femur made a convincing filler. Historians still argue whether it was common practice or a scandal exaggerated by the guild to scare apprentices straight. You've never used bone, but you've heard stories. And then there's the flour quality rankings. The Podesta's decree divides flour into 6 classes, from the purest white, biancissimo, to the coarsest brown mix used mostly for stable feed. You're allowed to use grades 2 through 4 for general baking, but only grade 1 for noble orders. This means, of course, that everyone wants grade 1 and everyone pretends to have it, which brings us to the inspectors of flour. These men are, let's say, thorough. They arrive unannounced, often in pairs, and wear somber robes like mourners. They carry scoops, ledgers, and expressions that suggest your entire livelihood offends them. One of them, a man named Giacomo, once stuck his nose directly into your flour sack and muttered, hints of walnut shell. You weren't even mad. You were just impressed, he could tell. The inspectors aren't just checking for purity, they're checking for origin. Because importing flour without a proper license is a punishable offense. Rule 26 requires visible declaration of all non-local flour sources to be approved by the guild and recorded with a notary. In short, if you sneak in grain from another town, expect trouble. You once bought a sack from Ferrara in a moment of desperation. Your usual supplier was ill, and there had been a rat infestation at the local mill. You didn't mark it. You didn't say anything. You just prayed no one noticed. No one did. That time, but you still dream about it. Flour guilt is real. Now, of course, you stick to your regular supplier, a man named Benedetto, whose beard holds more flour than your shelves. He's honest, mostly. You trust him more than the guild anyway. Still, every time you open a fresh sack, there's a moment of pause, a moment of risk. A quick prayer to Saint Honoritus, the patron saint of bakers, who probably has flour in his celestial ears from all the whispered pleas. Back at your shop, you find your apprentice wiping down the bench. The next dough batch is resting, covered in a linen cloth. The smell is tangy, rising just right. You give her a nod, and she smiles. That's a win. You check the flour bins again, habitually. The level's low. You'll need another delivery tomorrow. You make a note on your wax tablet and snap it shut like a man closing a secret. That's when Beatrice shows up. She's in her apron, arms floured, sweat glistening on her temple. You hear about the new levy? She asks without hello. No, you say, but I'm already angry. She laughs, and it's the kind of sound that makes you remember you're human. Furnace tax, she says. 1 denaro for every 4. Loaves starting next week. You blink. That's absurd. She shrugs. Absurdity's what we bake in, isn't it? You want to argue. You want to shout. But mostly you want a nap. Instead, you just sigh. At least it's not powdered. Bone again. She grins and tosses you a roll. On the house, it's only slightly cursed. You take a bite. It's warm, soft, and tastes like cinnamon and rebellion dot. And for a moment, the flour wars, the guild inspections, the loaves you give away, and the laws that hold you hostage all of it fades into the background. Just bread. Just in doubt until the next batch rises. The evening light turns golden, slanting through narrow alleyways and hitting the cracked windows of your shop just so dust in the air becomes a shimmer, like the city itself is baking. It would be beautiful if your arms didn't feel like wet rope and your feet weren't two aching stones wrapped in sweat. But now comes the hardest part of the day. The weighing dot again dot you sigh and pull out your weights, the same bronze discs you've used for years. 1 libra, 1 mezza. Tiny quarter-ounce weights you have to keep in a separate pouch so they don't get lost or accidentally baked into a loaf. It has happened. Once. And no, the inspector didn't laugh. You place a new batch of dough balls onto the scale. Each is roughly shaped, waiting to be turned into flatbread or crescent rolls or dense bricks for tomorrow's delivery to the monastery kitchen. This isn't artisan baking, it's obligation. There's a reason Rule 16 exists. All bread must be measured in accordance with the city's official bronze scale, under penalty of public reprimand or confiscation. Public reprimand isn't just a slap on the wrist here. It's literal. A city official reads your name from the steps of the town hall and announces your failure to everyone within earshot. The first time it happened to you, you considered hiding in a flour sack for the rest of the week. The second time, you just shrugged. Reputation only carries so far when everyone's hungry, but the fines hurt. 1 denaro per faulted loaf, and considering the average baker sells between 40 and 80 loaves a day, even a small miscalculation can wipe out a week's profit, which is why you're back at the scale. Always dot your apprentice watches silently. She's learning the weight of things, flour, responsibility, the gaze of the guild. She hands you a slightly misshapen roll. You place it gently on the scale. Just under regulation dot, she winces. It felt heavier. You nod. They always do. You pull off a small chunk and press in more dough from the next batch, reshaping it until it lands just on the mark. Legal, barely. That's all it needs to be. Barely legal is the true art of medieval baking. But it's not just about the weight. No, Rule 13 looms large today. Bread shall be priced in accordance with the fixed grain cost, as determined weekly by the magistrate. The trouble is the price of grain never matches the fixed rate. Grain fluctuates wildly, depending on harvests, floods, rats, bandits, or just a particularly moody merchant caravan. Yet you're forced to sell your bread at a price determined in a dry courtroom by men who have never touched dough dot. It's a losing game. Historians still argue whether this system protected the poor or merely squeezed the bakers dry. You have your opinion. It involves a lot of cursing and imaginary rotten eggs thrown at the magistrate's hat. You do what every baker does. You fudge it. You balance the losses from low-priced standard loaves by making high-margin item sweet rolls with honey, soft anise buns for weddings, extra crispy flatbread, popular with the fishmongers. You keep a second ledger, one that the inspector never sees. Everyone does it. Even the inspector probably does it. You're not a criminal. You're a survivor. And survivors multitask. As you shape loaves and double-check weights, your eyes keep flicking toward the shop door. Any minute now, the controller Del Payne could walk in. The bread controller. Yes, that's a real title. He's a slow-walking man with a fast eye. Wears a coat 2 sizes too big and always smells faintly of garlic and iron. You once saw him disqualify a baker for using poppy seeds without a written permit. Seeds. Permitted. Madness. You hear footsteps outside and instinctively stand straighter, brushing crumbs off your apron. But it's just a lamplighter. His pole taps gently against your shop front as he ignites the oil lamp outside. The light flickers into a weak orange glow, making your wooden sign swing and your loaves look momentarily golden and worthy. It's a comforting lie. You roll up your sleeves and begin preparing the tally for the day. Each sale logged, each weight checked, each donation recorded in case the church asks. It's a ritual of numbers and ink, done with the same care as mixing a sponge. You once dreamed of being an artist, actually. Or a monk, someone with ink-stained fingers and quiet days. But here you are kneading, weighing, and doing fractions with a knife. Still, there's satisfaction in getting it right, in feeling the dough rise just as expected, in slicing a loaf open and seeing the crumb open like a cathedral ceiling. That's your church now, the temple of crust and crumb. And even under all these regulations, there's a quiet pride. You remember the first time your bread was bought by a noble woman. She sent her servant back the next day to ask what you used. You said, "Time." She didn't laugh, but she came back, or the day the bishop himself pointed at your stall during a feast and said, "That one, the round one with the little mark like a sun, that was yours." You recognized a spoon-pressed swirl. He ate it with honey and declared it honest. That's the best compliment a baker can hope for, honest. You place the final dough rounds onto the shelf to rise overnight. It's quiet now. The streets outside have softened to evening hush. Somewhere a lute is playing. Somewhere a baby cries. Somewhere a magistrate is dreaming up new taxes. You blow out the main lantern and sit, just for a moment, in the quiet. Then you hear it. A knock on the door, slow, rhythmic, official. You exchange a glance with your apprentice. She's already reaching for the logbook, and the inspection waits. You open the door. It's not the bread controller. It's a boy, no older than 9. Clothes too big, eyes too wide. He holds out a copper coin and whispers, "My mum says please." You nod. You reach behind you and grab the misshapen loaf from earlier, the one that felt heavier. You wrap it in cloth and place it in his hands. He runs off without another word. You close the door. Bread is measured, but mercy, that's still free. You sleep like a stone, not the smooth kind found in streams, but the chipped, cracked, work-weary kind wedged under medieval cobblestones, always pressed underfoot. But at least sleep comes, eventually. Until, of course, the rooster screams. The same rooster that thinks sunrise is optional and starts squawking when it hears carts outside. You mutter something about turning it into stew, then roll off your straw mattress, stretch, and let your joints pop like overproofed dough. Another day, another loaf, another set of rules to pretend are reasonable. Your apprentice is already downstairs. She's lit the hearth, checked the starter, and swept the floor of last night's flower ghosts. You nod in approval. She's earning her future, one blister at a time. The first order of business, dough prep. Again, but today's challenge isn't bread for the market. It's the private order from the house of Signor Ludovico, a spice merchant with a beard that looks like it's been lacquered. His wife wants fancy bread braided, sweet, and glazed with egg yolk. Naturally, none of that appears in the standard guild menu, but you'll make it. You always do. You call it pan di lusso, or luxury bread. But the official term is potentially illegal unless declared. That's where Rule 37 kicks in. Bread of specialty or altered composition shall be registered with the Guild Council and may not exceed 3 times the base cost of standard loaves. 3 times, that's it, for something that costs you at least 4 times as much to make. And heaven forbid you use imported saffron again. Last time you got a fine and a lecture about flavor colonialism. Still, you mix the dough with extra care honey, milk, dried figs, and just enough spice to make it sing. You'll undercut cost by substituting a pinch of locally grown fennel instead of real cinnamon. The merchant won't notice. He's more interested in how the braids look beside the wine jug anyway. As the dough rests, you prepare the next batch for the public oven. It's your turn again, slot number 8. You gather the trays, check the stamps, recheck the weights, and head off through the already bustling streets. Halfway there, a commotion. Not a riot, those sound different, but something close. You round the corner and see it. A public bread burning again. This time it's a young baker, maybe 20, standing beside a pile of blackened loaves as the bread controller reads his name aloud. His face is red, not with shame, with rage. You recognize that look, the kind that makes someone leave the city and take up cheese-making in the hills. The crowd murmurs. Someone laughs. The burning pile sends up the usual smoke and symbolism. It's mostly for show. The loaves were probably just underweight, maybe by 10 grams, maybe 20. You remember your own first brush with the public scale, your knees trembling, the inspector measuring every crumb like he was weighing diamonds. You remember the burn of embarrassment more than fire, but you also remember what came after. The customers who avoided your stall for a week, the landlord who raised your rent, the guild rep who said, "Mistakes build character," as if character paid for firewood. You nod at the young baker as you pass. He doesn't see you. His eyes are fixed on the flames. You hope he lasts the year. At the communal oven, Pietro. The oven master greets you with his usual sarcasm. Ah, the Prince of Flour returns, late as ever. You're not late. He's early, but you smile and nod. That's how it works here. Everyone postures. Everyone pretends they're the one in control. Even the fire. You slide your loaves in. Watch the steam curl upward. Feel the heat slap your cheeks. It's like staring into a dragon's throat. Glorious and dangerous. You love this part. Hate it, too. There's a strange intimacy to this place. Bakers stand side by side, arms dusted, brows slick. pretending not to judge each other's technique, but they always do. You can tell who's using too much water, who didn't need enough, who's overcompensating with herbs. It's a quiet war of confidence. Today, Beatrice is 2 slots down. She gives you a nod, then pulls a flask from her apron. Walnut cordial, she says. For the nerves, you decline. The last time you accepted, you oversalted half your batch and blamed it on spiritual interference. No one believed you. Pietro calls your name. Your loaves are ready. You retrieve them carefully. Hot crusts, browned, just so, blistered in the right places. You tap one. It sounds hollow. Perfect. Another survives. You carry them back in a linen-lined basket, feeling briefly invincible, until you reach your shop and see the man waiting outside. He's tall, wearing a gilt sash, holding a leather-bound ledger and a very official frown. You hand him the inspection book before he asks. He doesn't speak for a moment, just flips through the pages, scanning weights, marks, ingredients. Then there's a discrepancy in your rye usage. You freeze. He looks up, eyes narrow. You've declared 5 loaves with mixed grain. The registry shows 7. You glance at your apprentice. She looks horrified. You step in. We donated 2 to the infirmary, you say, unmarked. We didn't weigh them for sale. A pause. He writes something down. Be sure to log donations properly next time. You nod. He doesn't smile. Just turns and walks away. It could have been worse. Much worse. You exhale and turn back to the counter. The merchant's servant arrives a few minutes later, nodding approvingly at the golden braided luxury loaves. He hands you a small pouch of coins and a folded note that says simply, His Lordship sends compliments. Do not use fennel next time. Of course. You slide the coins into your apron and get back to work because the oven still needs cleaning. The next dough needs folding. And someone just knocked, asking for bread without crust, which isn't a thing, but you'll figure it out. There are 47 laws. Probably more by now. And you follow them all. Almost. Evening settles into the city like flour into crevices, soft, slow, inescapable. You light the oil lamp in your storefront, its weak flicker bouncing off the cooling loaves and worn wooden shelves. This is the quiet hour, when the clang of the blacksmith fades, the shouting fishmongers vanish, and even the gossiping washerwomen retreat into shadow. Just you, your bread, and whatever's left unsold. Tonight's batch is respectable. You've sold most of it. The flatbreads went first, as usual, followed by the braided loaves. A few honey rolls are still left, their sheen dulled from the heat, but sweet nonetheless. You look at the remaining loaves and do the usual math. What will go to the infirmary, what to the cathedral's soup line, and what to the pigs? The pigs are reliable, at least. They don't care about crust structure or egg glaze. Then there's the split between rich and poor bread, something that's never as clear-cut as people think. Because medieval Italian bakers don't just bake one kind of bread. Oh no, you're practically a flour-based sommelier, juggling recipes, legal categories, and social expectations. Let's start with the rich. They want soft white bread, what the laws call pain di fiore. It's made from the finest sifted flour, usually from the top of the grind, where the grain is smooth and pale and nearly flavorless. They like that. To them, flavor means peasant. Texture means status. The wider the loaf, the fatter the purse. But there's a problem. Pain de fiery is expensive to make, not just in ingredients, but in time. It requires multiple siftings, finer water-to-flour ratios, and very even baking to keep it soft. One burned corner, and the merchant's wife will accuse you of sabotage. And of course, it must be baked with eggshell-precise weights. Law of 5 states. White bread for the nobility must weigh no less than 1 libra, contain no bran or husk, and be sold at no more than twice the grain index. You follow the rule, mostly. You might sometimes stretch the definition of bran-free when the flour delivery's been late, but no one's died. Yet, now, on the other side of the crust, there's bread for the poor. Pain Nero. Black bread. Coarse, dense, a mix of leftover wheat, rye, barley, whatever's cheapest or most available. Sometimes you even mix in chestnut flour or mashed beans to bulk it up. And yes, occasionally yesterday's stale crusts go right back into the dough. Call it rustic. Call it circular baking. Just don't call it illegal. The laws allow for some creative recycling in the name of charity. Rule 17 lays it out. Loaves intended for the poor may be made with grain remnants and must be clearly marked with a cut or stamp to prevent resale. So you score these loaves with a diagonal /A/ so deep it almost splits them in two. It's your signal to the world. This bread wasn't made for coin. It was made for hunger. Some days you envy the simplicity of Pain Nero. No one judges its crumb structure. No one weighs it with suspicion. It's honest, hearty, brutal, kind of like life. But then come the gray areas, the in-between breads. The ones you make for people who used to be rich or are about to be poor. These customers want white bread but can't afford it, or want black bread but still care what their neighbors think. You invent compromises, like Pain Misto, a 60/40 mix of white and wholemeal, with just enough honey brushed on top to make it seem fancier than it is. You bake it in slightly irregular shapes so it doesn't look like regulation nobility bread, but still smells expensive, or Pain del Feste, the festival bread. It's legally allowed to be irregular, lumpy, sweet, or spiced as long as it's sold only on church feast days, which is why half your customers suddenly become very religious around St. Rufino's name day. You bake extra. The bishop pretends not to notice. And let's not forget the bread for barters. That's the off-book stuff. A potter trades you 3 mugs for a week's worth of flatbread. A widow leaves a bundle of herbs in exchange for a rye loaf. A leatherworker's apprentice swaps repairs on your cracked belt in exchange for a bag of scraps and burnt crusts. None of this goes in the guild ledger, but it keeps people fed, keeps you fed, which brings us to the fines, because even in this delicate ballet of bread politics, someone always ruins the rhythm. Last week, one of your neighbors, Pasquale, 2 shops down, got slapped with a 2 denaro fine for excessive salt usage. The law limits salt content in standard loaves to 1 granule per pound of flour. That's barely a pinch. The inspector claimed his bread tasted briny. Pasquale claimed it was from his tears. You offered him a drink afterward. He declined. Probably too salty. You yourself have danced that line many times, especially when it comes to Rule 23. Sweetbreads must not be sold under the guise of standard fare, which means if you forget to mark a honey roll clearly, it counts as fraud. Fraud over honey. You once spent half an afternoon carving a tiny S into the top of every sweet bun with a fishbone. Your hands ached for days. Historians still argue whether this obsession with labeling came from food safety, taxation, or just an insatiable love of bureaucracy. You're not sure, but you're convinced that half of medieval Italy's paper shortages were caused by flour inspectors writing angry letters back in your shop. You pull aside 2 loaves for tomorrow's tithe. Every baker owes bread to the church, not money bread. The literal body of your labor. The priest doesn't eat it. He just blesses it and passes it on. Sometimes it ends up in the monastery kitchens. Sometimes it disappears into the bishop's pantry. Once, you're fairly sure your donated loaf was repurposed as a doorstop. You don't ask questions anymore, because Rule 4 says, a baker who fails to offer tithe loaves on designated days shall be subject to triple levy fines and ecclesiastical reprimand. And believe me, you'd rather face an angry customer than a passive-aggressive sermon. So, you mark the tithe loaves with a cross/deep, clean, holy, and set them on the shelf by the window. They'll be picked up at sunrise. As the lamp flickers lower, you sit by the window and break a crusty roll in half. 1 bite for now, 1 for later. Your apprentice curls in the corner, already half asleep, flour smudged on her cheek like war paint. Outside, the city quiets. The cats begin their shift. The bread cools into silence, and you wonder, as you do every night, if you vanished tomorrow, would your loaves still be made? Would someone remember your little spoon mark on the crust? Would the beggar boy still knock copper coin in hand? Bread isn't forever, but sometimes it leaves a trace. You wake to bells, not church bells this time, but something sharper, tighter. It takes you a moment to realize it's the bell above your door, tied to a length of twine and a piece of bent copper, announcing that someone has entered the shop. Before sunrise, you blink into the grainy darkness. The hearth glows faintly, still alive from last night's embers. You hear your apprentice stir upstairs. She doesn't come down. She knows better. You're the one who deals with unexpected customers before dawn. It's the bishop's steward. Of course it is. He looks like he hasn't slept in a week, robe wrinkled, hands stained with candle wax, eyes darting. A change in plans, he whispers. The bishop wants 7 loaves for the feast, not 5, and 1 must be pain benedetto. Ah, blessed bread. You nod slowly, trying to hide the sigh that climbs up your throat. This was bound to happen. Religious feasts are like tidal waves. They look peaceful from a distance, but drown you in preparation. You were told yesterday that 5 loaves would suffice. You adjusted your flour, prepped your egg wash, and even added extra anise for flair. Now you're short 1 ceremonial bread, and worse, you have to make pain benedetto. That means Rule 40 is in play. All loaves presented for ecclesiastical use must be prepared under sanctified conditions, free of contaminants, and may only be baked in an oven blessed within the calendar year. Guess what hasn't been blessed since January? Yours. You explain, quietly. The steward frowns. Use Beatrice's oven, he suggests, already turning toward the door. She had hers, blessed last week. You don't ask why he knows that. You just nod, swallow your annoyance, and start mixing. Pain benedetto is not difficult to make, but it's delicate. The flour must be sifted 3 times. The water must be drawn before sunrise and stirred with a wooden spoon that hasn't been used for anything else. You're not sure whether this is sacred science or just a bishop's personal taste. Either way, you comply. You send your apprentice to Beatrice's with a basket and a note. She'll understand. Bakers have each other's backs. Mostly dot as you prepare the remaining loaves honeyed, shaped into fish and stars. You think about how religion and bread have always shared a table. Not just here, everywhere. Bread isn't just food. It's symbol. It's Eucharist, it's fasting, it's alms. It's what people believe they deserve or are denied. And in medieval Italy, no. One forgets that you once heard a preacher shout in the piazza, "Bread is the soul of the city. When it rises, we rise. When it spoils, we suffer." He was mostly ignored, but not by you, because you live that metaphor daily. You rise when the dough rises. You fall when it collapses. Church influence reaches into every part of your oven. Take feast days. On the calendar they look festive, a time for rest, prayer, joy. But for bakers they're logistical nightmares. Each holiday brings its own bread, demands special shapes, specific flour ratios, symbolic scorings. For the feast of St. Cecilia, you must make round loaves with holes in the center symbolizing the purity of sound. For St. Dominic, it's small, knotted rolls, shaped like rosaries. And during Lent, flatbread only. No oil, no sugar. And heaven forbid you forget to mention which batch is Lenten compliant. The Church will inspect. Rule 27 governs all of this. On feast days, bakers shall observe the flour directives issued by the Archbishop's table and offer proof of observance before selling to parishioners. Proof of observance. In bread form, the absurdity might crush you if you didn't secretly enjoy the challenge, because, truth be told, there's something satisfying in turning flour and water into sacred ritual, like casting a spell. You wonder if monks ever feel this powerful. Still, the overlap of faith and food can be dangerous. You remember the scandal in Lucca 3 years ago, when a baker was accused of heresy for shaping loaves like doves. They looked too much like the Holy Spirit. The bishop had him exiled, or so the story goes. Historians still argue whether he was exiled, fined, or just changed careers and started selling cheese under a false name. Back in your shop, your apprentice returns. Beatrice's oven worked. The pane Benedetto is perfect, golden, symmetrical, dusted with flour in the shape of a cross. You package it in a basket lined with rosemary and a scrap of white linen. The steward returns to collect it just. After terce bell rings, he sniffs it, nods, says the bishop is pleased. You don't know how he knows that. You don't ask. You never do with the delivery done. The morning rush begins. Today's mix of customers is the usual parade. 3 old women who smell like fennel and know every regulation by heart. A spice merchant who insists his bread be warm but not hot. 2 giggling girls with coins from their mother, arguing over who gets the bigger roll. You serve them all with patience honed from hundreds of such mornings. The same questions, the same demands, the same jokes from the fishmonger. Got any loaves that taste like trout? You smile. Barely, but then there's the church scribe. He arrives quietly, robed in gray, and places a sealed scroll on your counter. You recognize the mark, Guild Decree. You open it, it's a new amendment. Rule 48. You blink. The scroll unfurls with unnecessary drama. All bakers are henceforth required to submit weekly records of bread weight, ingredient origin, and oven maintenance status, to be reviewed by the guild secretary every Sabbath. Your apprentice peeks over your shoulder. We already do all that, don't we? You nod slowly. Yes, but now we have to prove it. In writing. She sighs. You sigh. The scribe waits. You sign the scroll. Outside. Bells toll again. This time a funeral procession. You step to the window. Watch. The slow march of black robes, flickering candles, silent tears. And then behind the mourners you see someone carrying a loaf. A large, dark, unsalted bread wrapped in cloth. Pain morto, the bread of the dead. You forgot it was that day. Once a year, families deliver loaves to the cemetery plain, heavy bread, eaten in silence after burials. The tradition predates most of the church's own rituals. Some say it wards off restless spirits. Others say it simply fills empty bellies after long grief. You make a mental note to bake a few tonight, just in case anyone else forgets. The day stretches on. You mix, you knead. You shape loaves that fit expectations and loaves that defy them. Bread for saints, bread for sinners, bread for everyone in between. At dusk, you wipe your hands and lean against the doorframe. A child walks by, singing something tuneless. A dog barks from a rooftop. The smell of roasting garlic drifts from the neighbor's window. You close your eyes. The bell above your door rings again. You turn. It's Beatrice, holding a basket. Inside. 2 loaves. One for you, she says, and one for the dead. You take them both, because bread outlives us all. There's a smell in the bakery this morning that you can't place. Not bad, not good, just suspicious. You sniff again. It's not smoke, not rot, not sour yeast or spilled vinegar. It's faint. Faint like memory. Like something you were once warned about in a lecture by your old master, while you were too busy sneaking raisins. You find the source soon enough, the sack of flour delivered yesterday. It's slightly damp. You press your fingers into it. The grain clumps where it shouldn't. A touch too sticky. Not enough to discard it outright, but enough to put a pit in your stomach. This is where the laws get tricky. Rule 10 says, all flour must be stored in a dry, vermin-free space and must show no signs of mildew, spoilage, or off-hue. And if the guild finds you baking with spoiled flour, even unknowingly, you could be shut down for a week, or worse, be publicly declared a hazard to the mouths of the people. You've seen it happen. A baker in Arezzo had a mouse nest discovered in his grain bin. The bread inspector didn't even issue a fine, just posted a sign over his stall that read, infested by gluttony. The poor man ended up selling brooms instead. You won't risk that. You dump the whole sack. It cost you, yes, but not as much as a scandal. You walk to Benedetto's mill to order a replacement. He's chewing fennel and cursing at a sack that seems to be leaking. Humidity, he growls. Everything's sweating. Even the sacks. He offers you a discount half for friendship. Half because he knows you don't gossip. On the way back, you pass the tanner's stall and wonder if that's what the bakery had smelled like after all. The city breathes strange things. Back at the shop, your apprentice is shaping rolls. She has flour on her nose, and her elbows are dusted like snow. You almost don't want to tell her the batch is canceled. Almost, she sighs. All of it? You nod. And then, without complaint, she starts over. That's when you know she's becoming a real baker. Not because she can braid dough blindfolded. Not because she can guess weights by feel. But because she understands that baking means starting over when no one else sees why. Still, you keep a few pieces of the questionable dough. Not for sale. Not even for the pigs. You're going to bury it. Yes. Bury it. This isn't some symbolic gesture. It's local superstition. If dough is spoiled, you bury it behind your shop with a sprig of rosemary so the yeast doesn't rise in vengeance. You don't have to believe it. But do you really want to risk angering fermenting spirits? You dig the hole behind the rain barrel, cover the dough gently, and mark it with a bent spoon. Tradition. Back inside, you start over. Again, this time you're baking under pressure. A tavern in the North Quarter has ordered 12 dozen round loaves for a wedding. And not just any wedding, the daughter of a merchant marrying a minor noble. That means half the guests expect white bread, and the other half will judge you for not making it fancier. You readjust your ratios. Start mixing. Then the door bangs open. It's not a customer. It's a boy, panting hard, clutching a rolled up parchment. Message from the guard captain. He wheezes, eyes wide, like he's just outrun his own shadow. You unroll it. Frown. There's a new restriction. Emergency ordinance. Effective immediately. The sale of rye flour bread is prohibited in the northern districts until further notice, due to suspected spoilage in regional grain shipments. Bakers found in violation will face seizure of inventory and public penalties. You sigh so hard your bones feel it. Because, of course, you've got rye dough resting on the bench. Enough for 30 loaves. All legal yesterday. Now, contraband. This is where you really start to understand the flexibility of medieval law enforcement. You could bake it and sell it to the South Quarter, or pass it off as barley heavy and hope no one questions the flavor. Or you could bake it for yourself and the apprentice, which is probably safest. Your apprentice suggests giving some away to the almshouse. You think about Rule 46. In times of grain emergency, charitable distribution must be pre-approved by the guild secretary. You laugh. Let's not make charity illegal today. So you bake it, keep it warm, eat a loaf right there in the corner, sitting on an overturned crate. It's good, dense, nutty, a bit chewy. The kind of bread that makes a meal all on its own. The wedding loaves, meanwhile, rise beautifully. You shape them with extra care, scoring each with a simple twist fancy enough for nobles, humble enough for merchants. You brush them with a thin glaze of egg yolk and rose water, a trick you picked up from a Neapolitan baker who swore it made the crust shimmer. It does, but only in the right light. By the time the tavern steward arrives, the loaves are packed neatly in cloth-lined crates. He inspects them, smelling, squeezing, even tapping one like he's judging a melon. Finally, he nods. The Lord's steward will be pleased. You raise an eyebrow. That's what you said last time, before he accused me of burning the sesame. The steward smirks. He says that to everyone. He accused the roast pig of being too philosophical last week. You take the payment, mostly coin, some salted fish, a tiny bottle of perfume, and watch the crates vanish down the road. Another day's work, another rule obeyed. Barely Dot, just as you're about to rest, the bread inspector shows up. Dot, of course. He's new, young, eager, dangerous. He walks into your bakery with all the ceremony of a knight entering a tournament. Except instead of armor, he carries a clipboard. Instead of a sword, a ladle. Random inspection, he declares. You nod. Naturally, he pokes the flour, sniffs the cooling loaves. Weighs 3 at random. You pass Dot, then he points at the bench. That loaf. What grain is that? You glance, Dot. It's one of the rye loaves, still warm. The emergency ordinance is only hours old. Technically, it wasn't for sale. Technically, Dot, your apprentice, opens her mouth. You speak first, personal consumption. He eyes it, sniffs, tears. A piece, Dot, chews. Dot, he chews for a long time, then shrugs. Tastes fine. He writes something, nods, leaves. You don't breathe until he's gone. Then you and your apprentice look at each other and laugh, Dot, because today the rules didn't win. Not entirely, Dot, and that in your world is as close to freedom as you get. The next morning it rains, Dot, not the kind of soft drizzle that makes people lean out windows and sigh wistfully, but the heavy, insistent kind that slaps roof tiles and drips down collars. Your shop smells like wet stone and damp ash with just a trace of burnt crust from the batch you left a minute too long last night. It happens. You scrape the oven clean, stoke it with dry olive wood, and consider your fortune. No floods, no rat sightings, no guild letters stuck to your door. So far, so good. But then the flour won't mix, Dot, it clumps oddly. Too much air, or too little, or the weather is throwing off your balance again. Rain makes everything swell and stick, and the damp settles into the dough like a brooding mood. Fermentation's sulking. You mutter. Your apprentice giggles. She's cleaning the bench, humming a ballad about a knight who dies choking on a bread crust. Folk songs are weirdly specific in your line of work. You adjust the dough with a few pinches of older starter. That should help. Maybe. Maybe not. This is the part they never put in the rules, the invisible battles, the times when dough doesn't rise, when flour turns on you, when fire flares too hot or cools too fast, when a loaf collapses in the middle like it's lost the will to be bread. You remember Rule 31. In times of spoilage or fermentation failure, bakers shall be held liable only if intent or negligence can be proven, which sounds reassuring until you realize negligence is whatever the inspector says it is. You've heard the stories. Bakers fined for using clouded water because it was drawn from a well after a rainstorm. Others punished because their yeast behaved unpredictably during a fast and their loaves rose too high, as though dough could defy church-approved piety. Historians still argue whether one infamous baker in Verona was excommunicated for deliberate over-leavening, or just happened to insult the bishop's nephew. Either way, the man moved to Milan, changed his name, started selling dried fruit. Safer that way. You're not that dramatic, Dot. You fix your dough, Dot. It's slow going, but eventually the texture evens out. You portion it carefully small loaves today. With the rain, fewer people will venture to the market. Better to sell out early than watch your wares get soggy and unloved dot outside. The streets have become a glistening maze of puddles and slippery stone. Delivery boys skid by with baskets under waxed claws. The cooper's cart creaks like a dying cow. Someone sneezes theatrically from 3 stalls down. You load your loaves onto the delivery tray, wrap them in cloth, and slip a spare roll into your sleeve for emergencies or bribes. As you pass the piazza, you see 2 bread inspectors under an awning, sheltering from the rain. They look bored. That's worse than angry. Bored inspectors tend to get curious. You lower your head and walk faster. At the Hospital Vecchio, where the city's sick and poor huddle beneath wool blankets, you hand over your charity bread. The sister in charge thanks you with a nod and a small jar of goose fat. For your hands, she says, or your frying pan. You choose not to clarify. The charity loaves are important, not just morally, but legally. Rule 36. All bakers shall provide 1 loaf per day for charitable purposes, or pay a fine equivalent to the cost of bread for 3. And while some bakers pay the fine instead, you deliver. Always. You've seen what hunger looks like when it's got a cough and no shoes. On the way back, you cut through the fishmonger's alley. A mistake. The smell is apocalyptic. You hold your breath and nearly trip over a cat. Back in the shop, you hang your soaked cloak near the oven. The heat will dry it eventually. For now, it steams like a sulking ghost. Your apprentice is rolling out dough for flatbreads. She's good, focused, humming again. You think about asking her what she's humming, then don't. Let her have her rhythm. You knead, shape, slide trays into the oven. The heat is perfect, now an even glow. You whisper, thanks to Saint Honoritus, under your breath. Not because you believe he's listening. Just in case. Then you hear it. A crack. You spin. The oven's side near the base has split. A hairline fracture, but unmistakable. The brick's gone soft. Damp. You freeze. Oven cracks are a nightmare. They spread, and if the fire gets in the gap, you could lose the whole dome. Worse, an inspector might declare the oven structurally compromised and demand repairs, which cost a lot. You douse the flame gently, let the temperature drop, then inspect it. The crack isn't wide yet, but it needs attention. You add it to the mental list of quiet disasters. Right beneath, find new flour supplier and pretend not to hate rosewater. Repairs will require guild approval, per Rule 42. All structural oven repairs must be performed under guild supervision, with materials certified by the inspector of furnaces. You consider bribing the blacksmith instead. He's discreet, loves bread, but that's a problem for tomorrow, not tonight. You do what bakers always do when the oven threatens rebellion. You make forno morto, dead oven bread, baked not in rising heat, but falling. It's trickier, requires precise timing, but it's silent, gentle, less stress on the dome. You wait. Let the temperature slip into the right range. Then slide in the flatbreads, the honey rolls, the black bread, loaves with their rough crusts, and then you sit. The smell of baking bread fills the room slowly. Sleepy, humid, soft, you close your eyes, and when you open them, your apprentice has set a mug of warm wine on the table. It's weak, but sweet. Tomorrow, she says, we patch the oven. You nod, and take a sip. because it's still warm. And today, that's enough. The bread police arrive at noon. Not with swords or shackles, but with clipboards and tight lips. Two of them, matching cloaks, matching scowls. One tall, one short, both wearing the official guild medallion bronze discs stamped with a loaf and a scale. It's supposed to symbolize balance and nourishment. It usually just means trouble. You're already sweating, and not just from the oven heat. The crack in the wall is hidden, covered with a cloth and a strategically stacked pile of kindling. It's a temporary solution, the kind that buys you time and hopefully a little mercy. The tall inspector speaks first. Inspection. Bread weight, grain source, structural compliance. No good morning, no smile. Standard protocol. You nod and wipe your hands, motioning them toward the back of the shop where your daily logs are kept. Your apprentice vanishes to the front, pretending to sweep while very obviously eavesdropping. Smart. They begin with the logs. Your numbers are neat, too neat, probably. They raise eyebrows. They always do. The shorter one hums skeptically, running a finger down the column. Labeled donated loaves. You've listed 7 this week. Technically true. Some of those loaves might have been, let's say, less than regulation in shape or structure. But the church accepted them. That's all that matters. Then comes the tasting. Yes, tasting. The bread police are authorized to sample random loaves from your shelves. Rule 15. All bread sold within city walls is subject to quality verification by official agents through weight, texture, and taste. Taste. As if that can be regulated. You watch as the shorter one selects a loaf of your pain dissimilar coarse grain, yellowish hue, popular with laborers. He taps it, sniffs it, tears it, chews, slowly, as if he's expecting betrayal to reveal itself in the crumb. He nods, slightly, but says nothing. The taller one weighs a honey roll. It's exactly on mark. You know because you checked it 3 times. Still, he writes something in his ledger. You never find out what. Then he looks at the oven. You feel your stomach clench. Has this oven been inspected this year? He asks, already knowing the answer. Yes, you lie. Your apprentice freezes in the corner. She's holding a broom like it's a sword. The inspector steps closer to the oven, runs a hand along the side. The crack is invisible beneath the cloth. He doesn't remove it. Instead, he sniffs. Just sniffs. Good aroma, he says at last. And then he walks away. Just like that. You don't exhale until they're both gone and the bell above your door has stopped ringing. Your knees give a little. You sit on a flour sack and laugh, not because it's funny, but because relief needs somewhere to go. Later, Beatrice visits. She brings a small jar of mortar and a basket covered with a cloth. For your flower pots, she says, grinning. She's not subtle, but she's kind. You patch the crack that night, quietly, illegally, successfully, and then, because you're still jittery from the inspection, you make more bread. Not for sale, not for guild quotas, just for the sake of it, for the feel of dough under your fingers and the calming rhythm of kneading. You make a small batch of pain spezzato, the broken bread rolled with olives, rosemary, and the ends of yesterday's loaves. Not elegant, but delicious. You eat it, warm by the window as the rain starts again. Less angry this time, more like a lullaby. The next day brings something even stranger than inspectors. A request, a formal one, a letter delivered by a city courier with ink-stained fingers and terrible posture. It's from the Guild of Notaries. They want you to provide bread for a banquet, 50 loaves, all identical for a ceremonial feast marking the appointment of the new Capo del Sigillo, the head of seals. You don't even know what that is. You assume it involves wax, but they're offering double the usual rate. And crucially, they've pre-approved the ingredients. You read the list 3 times. It includes cinnamon. Cinnamon. You haven't used cinnamon in over a year. Not since. The last spice shipment got lost and replaced with expired peppercorns. But now, permission, authorization. Spice. You say yes. You say yes before they can change their minds. The next 2 days are a frenzy of preparation. Your apprentice nearly burns her eyebrows off trying to melt honey for the glaze. You catch yourself humming while sifting flour. You even clean the shop's sign, which hasn't been touched since the pigeon incident. Each loaf must be round, brushed with honey, and stamped with a spiral seal to symbolize the eternal wisdom of bureaucracy. You use the back of a spoon, twisting. Just right. They look beautiful. Almost too beautiful. You deliver them at dawn on the feast day, still warm. The notaries don't thank you. They nod, like statues. You're handed a bag of coin and a wax token bearing the guild's insignia half symbol, half bribe. Your apprentice stares at it, then at you. Are we not supposed to accept tokens? You shrug. We're not supposed to patch ovens either. You hang the token behind the counter, just out of reach. Just in case that night you make bread for the poor again. This time a little sweeter. The end of the honey batch may be too much salt by accident. No one complains. One boy says it tastes like sunshine. He has no teeth. You take that as high praise. You followed the rules this week. Well, most of them, and that's about as perfect as a baker gets. The summer heat arrives like a slap dot. It sneaks in at first warming your bones, making the yeast more obedient. And then suddenly, the entire city is an oven. The stone walls of your shop radiate heat. The floor sweats. Your bread rises too fast, too soon, like a child you weren't ready for. You've adjusted your schedule to work earlier, sleep less, drink more water, and keep a damp cloth over the proving bowls. Even so, you can already tell you'll lose a few loaves to overproofing. Today, the crusts will split too wide. The insides will collapse. But there's no pause button in bread making, especially not when summer brings a fresh wave of rules. Enter furnace tax season. Yes, it's real. A tax levied not on your bread, but on your oven. Because heat, apparently, is a public commodity now. Rule 45, revised for the summer months. All baking furnaces must be registered, measured, and taxed based on average daily usage as calculated by the guild surveyor. The surveyor arrives just after sex bell. He's round, pink from sunburn, and carries a long measuring stick, a wax tablet, and a tiny hourglass. He times your baking session, times it, as if you're racing the dough to the finish line. He peers into your oven, nods, writes something. You offer him a honey roll. He declines. Conflict of interest, he says, while very obviously eyeing your apprentice's batch of fig bonds cooling near the window. You'll be charged 3 denarii per baking hour, which means with your usual output, you're looking at far too much. Later, over your midday bread and goat cheese, you do the math again. It still ends badly. Dot, the forno was once your pride, your source of power. Now it feels like a liability. Maybe. We should cook in the sun. Your apprentice jokes, wiping sweat from her brow. You almost consider it. Instead, you get creative. That evening, you bake small batches only. You let the heat fall naturally and use residual warmth forno morto. Again for your secondary loaves. It saves a few coins, and it teaches your apprentice patience. You also start delivering more raw dough to nearby inns and private homes. Technically, you're not supposed to outsource baking unless you own both ovens, but you're just sharing techniques. And people like warm bread with dinner. You've become part of the underground dough economy. Everyone's doing it. You know for a fact Beatrice bakes half her tavern orders at her cousin's wine cellar, where the fireplace doubles as an oven. The chimney smoke smells like conspiracy. Dot. Then come the flour quotas. Another summer. Delight. Because of poor wheat yields in the nearby valleys, the city council announces a temporary grain ration. All bakers must register their flour usage. Not just by weight, but by origin. Rule 33. Activated for crisis conditions. No baker shall use more than 1 sack of white flour per day, unless granted express exception by the grain officer. You use 2 on a slow day. Dot. You go to the grain office with your hat in hand. Literally, it's too hot to wear. You wait an hour under a faded awning, next to 3 other bakers, a brewer, and 1 extremely loud chicken. Dot. When it's your turn, the clerk hands you a form and says, "Be quick." The ink's melting. You scribble out a request and hand over a sample of your bread as a quality assurance measure, a familiar bribe. The clerk tears off a bite and waves you through. Approved. Temporarily. A yellow slip of parchment confirms it. You pin it to your flour sack like a badge. Is this legal? Your apprentice asks. You shrug. It's legal until they say it isn't. Later that night, you dream of loaves marching in circles, chanting regulations. One of them wears a wig. You wake up muttering flour ratios, but it's not all frustration. Somehow, in the margins of your overregulated, underappreciated life, moments of grace appear, like the elderly woman who brings you a bunch of lavender in exchange for a tiny olive loaf. She says it reminds her of her wedding day. The bread was terrible, she adds, but the smell was the same. Or the shoemaker's apprentice who sneaks in just before sunset, pressing 3 waxed buttons into your hand and whispering, "My mother says thank you." She didn't eat for 2 days until your loaf showed up. You tell him the buttons aren't worth a full roll. He grins and says, "They're not for the roll, they're for you." You keep them in your apron pocket, for luck. And then there's the boy with the missing teeth, your regular. He shows up again today, this time with a handful of cherries and a triumphant expression. "I traded a fish for these," he says. Fish and a story. You hand him half a sweet roll. "Don't you want to hear the story?" he asks mid-bite. "Always," you say. Dot. And so he tells you, between chews, about a 1-legged baker who once beat a nobleman in a bread competition by shaping a loaf like a battle helmet. No one could eat it, but everyone clapped. Dot. It probably never happened, but you laugh anyway, because sometimes, even surrounded by laws and inspections and levies, the bread reminds you what it's really about. Feeding. Not just stomachs, but memories, pride, resilience, and occasionally very strange stories. That night, your apprentice presents you with a surprise, a loaf shaped like a helmet, burned on the bottom, too much flour on top, but unmistakable. You raise an eyebrow. Too philosophical? She asks, quoting the merchant steward. You grin. Just enough. And you break it in half. Warm, crumbly, imperfect, exactly how it should be. At some point, your bakery becomes your entire world. Not metaphorically. Literally. You live above it. You sleep beside it. You eat in it. And you work every inch of it, again and again, like a monk endlessly copying the same sacred page. Bread is your calendar. You mark days not by saints or seasons, but by dough stages. Sponge day, rest day, market day, and dread day. That's when the guild's treasurer visits. Today is a dread day. You know it the moment you hear the distinct knock. Too short, one long, then silence. The pattern of bureaucracy. You wipe your hands, grab the ledger, and open the door. The treasurer is small, sharp, and always wearing a red sash over a gray robe that smells faintly of ink. He walks with a limp, which he claims he got in a flower. Barrel accident. You don't ask. He enters without waiting, nods at your apprentice, and sits down with a groan that feels intentional. Let's begin, he says, producing a quill that already looks angry. He starts flipping through your ledger. Your apprentice fidgets in the corner, kneading dough with the urgency of someone trying to avoid being noticed by a tax collector. Smart. You've kept your records clean. Sales, donations, material usage, tithes, each carefully marked. Except, of course, for the other ledger, the one you keep hidden behind the second flour bin, the one with real numbers. Because that's how it works here. The treasurer pauses. At one entry, 6 loaves marked as courtesy gifts. Explain. You keep your face still. A wedding. The family offered only partial coin. I made up the difference in product. He clicks his tongue. Noted. But next time mark as barter. He doesn't fine you. Not today. Just records the moment. And moments can become patterns. Patterns, violations, fines, vines. You've learned the rhythm of this too. After he leaves, you let yourself sag onto a stool. Your apprentice hands you a mug of watered wine. You raise it to minor mercies. She clinks her mug to yours and grins. And uninspected corners. Still, all this pressure builds over time, and not everyone handles it well. You've seen bakers snap, There was Ricardo from the Western Quarter. He started substituting chestnut flour for wheat without approval. Said it tasted better. When inspectors found out, they didn't just fine him. They barred him from baking for a month. He ended up selling vegetables, mumbling to himself in Latin about how the crust had never lied. Or Lucia from down near the harbor. She got caught selling pre-weighed dough to sailors, who then baked it aboard ship and claimed it was travel loaves. Illegal, of course. Portable baking without guild oversight. Scandalous. She argued, shouted, even quoted scripture. Didn't matter. Her oven was smashed, literally by order of the magistrate. Historians still argue whether these crackdowns were about food safety, trade control, or simply envy from underperforming guild members. You've come close once yourself, It was the year of the famine. Grain prices soared. Quotas tightened. Customers yelled. And the city issued a new regulation. Rule 49. No loaf shall contain more than 20% bean or legume substitute without declaration and approval. You had no wheat left, only barley. And the miller gave you a sack of crushed fava beans, which bake up fine in a pinch if a little dry. You made one batch. Just one. Didn't mark it. An inspector tasted it, paused, and said, "Strange finish." You laughed, like the end of a long sermon. He smirked and walked on. Close call. After that, you promised yourself never again. But promises in this business crack like crust. You think about those who really snapped. There was Mateo, old, tired, ran the bakery near the south gate. One day he refused to weigh a single loaf, sighed he trusted the bread. When inspectors came, he threw his spoon at them. Legend says he carved, "The law is hungry," into his oven before vanishing into the hills. Some say he lives in a cave now, making sourdough for squirrels. You don't blame him, because sometimes you wonder, what if you did walk away, sell the shop, take your apprentice and head north where the laws are lighter. Find a town without a guild. Bake what you want, how you want. No weight checks, no fines, no flour quotas. Just bread. But then someone knocks. It's the seamstress. She holds out a coin in a small cloth pouch. "I heard you make pain con seeded bread. Her husband's favorite. He's ill. Can't eat much. Wants something soft but with crunch." You nod. You don't sell that kind often. It's tricky to get the texture right, but you'll make it for her. For him. Because no matter how many rules choke the craft, this is still what you do. You make bread for people. Not inspectors, not ledgers. People. So you mix the dough carefully. Add poppy seeds, fennel, crushed flax. You let it rise just a little longer, then shape it into a round. Soft but sturdy. Your apprentice watches. That for someone special? Yes. You say they all are. She doesn't ask more. Just helps brush the top with egg and place it gently on the peel. That night, you eat a crust of it yourself. Just to test. It's good. One of your best. Tomorrow you'll be back to rules and ratios. But for tonight, you are simply a baker, and the bread is honest. The nights are longer now, not by much, just enough that the stars seem to arrive before you've had a moment to breathe. You light the small clay lamp above your ledger and lean into the silence. Outside, the city has dimmed into its whispering self. Shutters are closed, dogs curled beneath carts, and the wine singers have finally stopped wailing their off-key serenades. Inside your shop, the only sound is bread cooling, crackling, little pops and sighs as the crusts settle and steam drifts into the room like a ghostly blessing. You love this moment more than you admit. It's the only time the bread speaks to you. Your apprentice is asleep, curled under a thin blanket in the corner. She tried to stay awake during the final bake, but her head kept bobbing like an overproved ool. You let her drift. You sit with your thoughts, your aches, and your tiny victories. A tray of fig rolls sold out. Your oven patch hasn't cracked. The guild secretary sent no notes today. That's a win, and yet you can feel something shifting. The bakery feels older, not just from the soot-blackened walls or the worn-down counters, but in your bones. You rise slower. Your hands tighten after kneading. You miss fewer things but forgive more of them. This work doesn't age gracefully. It just ages. You wonder if you'll keep doing it forever, or if one day you'll hand over the peel, the spoon-mark stamp, and the secret rye ratios to someone else. Maybe your apprentice, maybe not. Maybe she'll want to open her own stall, start her own wars with flower inspectors. You hope she does, because despite it all, the rules, the fines, the long nights and short tempers, this is a trade that matters. The city forgets most things, but never the baker. They might not know your name, but they know your bread. They recognize it by shape, by scent, by the tiny mark you press into the crust with a flourish. Like a farewell kiss, they trust you in the way people trust cobblers, midwives, and barbers. With something personal, vital, intimate, you feed them. And that's power, It's also pressure, especially when the next morning brings a letter. Again, this one is sealed in red wax, bearing the insignia of the Capitano di Giustizia, the city's enforcer. Not the guild, not the bishop. The law. You read it once. Then again, a baker in the neighboring quarter has been arrested, accused of bread fraud, a term that somehow sounds both ridiculous and terrifying. They say he altered his flour records, claimed wheat where there was none, overcharged nobles, underfed the poor. You knew him, casually. His name was Aldo, a quiet man with clever fingers. He used to make turtle-shaped loaves for children. You never saw him cheat. But who does? The letter ends with a notice. All bakers must submit monthly grain accounts within 3 days or be fined and placed under review. You sigh. Not because you can't do it. You can, but because it means more hours with ink and numbers and second-guessing everything you already know. You pull out your grain log. The real one. Your apprentice walks in with 2 mugs of warm goat's milk. She sets one beside you and studies. Your face. Bad news. Bureaucracy. You say, worse than rats. She chuckles. At least rats are honest. You nod. And better company. The 2 of you work late, tallying grain shipments, matching them against sales, donations, oven logs, and of course guild permits. It's dizzying. It's dull. It's dangerous if done wrong, but you've done this dance too long to trip now. The report is ready by dawn. You seal it. Send it with the same delivery boy who once brought you cherries in exchange for stories. He's taller now, quieter, still no front teeth. Then it's back to the dough. Today's order is odd. 15 oblong loaves for a visiting diplomat from Pisa. He's requested no salt, no crust, and a firm interior. You pause. So, a brick? Your apprentice laughs so hard she nearly spills the water jug. You shape the dough as best you can. Bake it in a cooler oven. Wrap each loaf in damp cloth. It's the kind of bread that's technically legal, deeply unappealing, and utterly forgettable. But that's the point. Diplomatic bread isn't supposed to taste good. It's supposed to be neutral, like rice. Or apologies. The diplomat's servant collects the order with barely a nod. You resist the urge to ask if he'd like a spoonful of salt on the side. That afternoon, Beatrice stops by. She's got circles under her eyes and a sack of stale rolls. She's turned into something like biscotti. You exchange complaints. The treasurer caught me short a half ounce. She says, I blamed the humidity. You nod. I blamed ghosts. She grins. Always works. Then, as she's leaving, she pauses. Do you ever think about quitting? You look at the oven, the walls, the soot, the flour hanging in the air like powdered memory. Yes, you say all the time. She nods, doesn't laugh, but then she says, well, if you do teach me your fig roll recipe first. Deal. That night, after your apprentice has gone to bed and the last embers in the oven fade to dark red whispers, you walk to the shelf where your old spoon rests, the one that made your stamp, the one your master gave you years ago, with hands more scarred than yours and a voice that always smelled like anise. You hold it, just for a moment, and you wonder, when did this job become a life? And when does a life become a legacy? The wind changes. You can smell it before you feel it, a sudden shift in the city's breath. Less heat, more dust. The scent of olives bruising on stone, of old parchment being cracked open. A storm might be coming, or just the end of a season. Either way, your bones feel it first. You wake before the bell. There's no emergency, no fire, no inspector at the door. Just something in your chest that says, rise now. So you do. You move slowly, quietly. The oven is still warm from last night's final bake, so you skip the firewood. Instead, you take inventory, not of flour, or coin, or fines, but of time. How many years now? You've lost count. There's the ledger, sure. Somewhere in the back you could find the first page. The day you were officially listed as Maestro Panettiere, Master Baker. It felt huge back then. Now, just a fact. Like crust forming on dough dot, your apprentice enters, rubbing her eyes, her braid half undone. She stumbles to the bench and starts, whisking air into eggs without speaking. You smile. That's how you know she's nearly ready. No words, just work. You hand her the peel without thinking, and she takes it without flinching. She's shaping her loaves differently these days. Slightly flatter, with a twist you didn't teach her. You could correct it, remind her of Rule 20. Standard market bread must conform to the city's designated loaf profile. But you don't, because you remember when you started bending. Rules. Her loaves sell. People ask for the twist kind. It's not rebellion. It's evolution. You step back. Let her run the morning mix. She barely notices. That's good. You turn your attention to an order from the Tailor's Guild, 16 flat loaves, unsalted, wrapped in linen, marked with the guild crest. You remember when you used to fret over the crests. You tried spoons, stamps, even burned them in with hot rods. Now, you score them by hand. They're not perfect, but they're yours. Later, as she bakes, you take a walk, not far. Just to the market square, you watch other bakers setting up. You see Beatrice arguing with a sausage vendor. You spot 2 guild scribes pretending not to eat while they count loaves. And you feel detached. Not in a sad way, more like a visitor in your own story. You return with a lemon, some dried plums, and a small clay whistle shaped like a bird. A gift for your apprentice. She doesn't smile when you give it to her, but she tucks it into her apron and whistles once before returning to work. That means something. The day passes. You weigh loaves, slice stale ends. Give a burnt roll to a boy who claims it was on purpose. The usual. And then, near sunset, something happens. An old man enters your shop. He's tall, stooped, and familiar. It takes you a moment. Then, 2. He was your first inspector, from years ago. The one who said your crusts were too philosophical. The one who nearly fined you for poppy seeds. He looks older now, softer Dot. He picks up a roll, squeezes it, smells it. This was yours? He asks. You point to your apprentice. He chews, nods. She's better than you were. You grin. That's the point. He leaves without another word. You sit for a while after that, in the doorway, watching the sky turn lavender, listening to the clatter of horses, the slap of laundry in the wind, a lute playing somewhere badly, and then your apprentice sits beside you. She hands you half a roll, the twist kind. You eat in silence. Then she asks, quietly, do you think we'll be remembered? You don't answer immediately, because the truth is, probably not, Dot, not by name, not in books, maybe in guild records, buried in fines and flour weights, but not truly. Not you, but maybe the bread. Maybe someone will describe that twist loaf from the southern quarter. Maybe they'll keep scoring their crusts like stars. Maybe they'll tell a story about a baker who buried bad dough behind the rain barrel. That would be enough. You turn to her. I think if someone eats a loaf you made, and it makes their day a little better, that's remembering. She nods, Dot, then. With that strange confidence of the young, she says, I'll bake for both of us. You believe her, Dot, and for the first time in a long while, you let yourself imagine a morning when you don't rise before dawn, when the oven groans without your hand to stoke it, when the flour dust settles on someone else's shoes. You think. You could like that, Dot. You watch the moon rise, Dot, and for once you feel light, Dot. Now the oven has cooled. The last embers sleep beneath the stone. The loaves are gone, eaten, traded, gifted, or saved for tomorrow's hunger. The shop is still, the air rich with the faintest trace of yeast, rosemary, and something warm you can't quite name. Your apprentice has gone upstairs. You've washed your hands. The spoon rests on its hook. The ledger is closed. Outside, the streets whisper with the slow hush of nighttime life. A distant shutter creaks. A cat leaps from a barrel. Somewhere, someone hums an old bread song to a baby already half-dash, dreaming, Dot. And here you are, Dot, breathing, Dot, resting, Dot, letting the silence rise like dough in the dark, Dot. No inspectors. No measurements, no rules, just this quiet, earned, honest, and fleeting. You think about the dough rising on the shelf, how it waits without rush, how, even in the quietest hour, life stirs inside it. Gentle, patient, certain. You think, maybe the same is true for you, Dot, so let the lights dim. Let the noise drift further away. Let the warmth of the oven linger, soft in your limbs. And let the last sound you hear tonight be that small, crackling whisper of crust, cooling in the dark. You did enough today, Dot. The bread rose. You rose, Dot. Sleep now. The bakery will wait. Sweet dreams.